Welcome to Stories by Kev. Tonight's story is one of my favorites. It appeared in the Black Dog Review, and it's called Playground. Joyce was out of uniform before her last customer was out of the store. She couldn't leave yet, not before gathering up the usual supply of chips, pizza, and cola. Picked up a bagged salad along the way. If a girl can't treat herself, what's the point of working? Joyce lived by routine. She always had. When she married Bucky, the routine was good. He was a fighter back then, handsome and strong. Had a great record, never lost until he suffered his first knockout. That fight ended it. Bucky never won again. Before he got scrambled, well, wasn't that a ride? All the girls wanted to be with Bucky, and why not? He was handsome then, yeah. He sure was. Not handsome now, no. Joyce wished one of those girls would come back and steal him from her. But none of them did. Hers was the final bell. She walked home from Jackson's groceteria just like she always did. Had a car, but walking was slower. Told Bucky she left it at home for him, just in case he wanted to go out for anything. Bucky never wanted to go out. Couldn't go out was more like it. Couldn't fit in the car, couldn't make it out the front door. As long as Bucky stayed inside, safe in front of the television, no one would see the burden she bore. No one except for Raymond, who lived downstairs. Raymond was their tenant, and he was a good guy. Paid his rent on time and didn't make a lot of noise, unless he was with Joyce. Oh yeah, he made noise then, but so did she. They had a thing. They were an item. Love, not so much, but freedom for both of them. Oh yeah. Raymond was a real gentleman. He would tell her how nice she looked before asking about her day. He'd make snacks for both of them and sit with her in front of his television until they fell asleep watching Netflix. Bucky didn't have a clue. He was happy just to exist, being enabled by whatever made Joyce stay with him. Most nights, he went to sleep in his recliner. It was easier to fire himself out of the chair by sitting up real quick than it was to get out of the bed. That was a consideration in the middle of the night when you had to go for a piss. Inertia worked against Bucky, and that kept him more or less stationary. Stationary objects are easily navigated, and that's what Joyce and Raymond did with him. They sailed around him on a love boat made of convenience, or at least they did until a few weeks ago. Raymond got a little more serious than Joyce was ready for, and she called a time out. The cessation of love yoga was on Joyce's mind as she went through her routine that night. She served up Bucky's first supper shortly after walking in the door, handing him a 3-pack of submarine sandwiches like you might hand a dog a biscuit. She made sure his side cooler was full of beer and asked for parting requests before retreating to a small table on her side of the apartment. It sat under a window that looked out to the street. From that table, she could see a playground, and if she got home early enough, she'd see children playing. On the sill of the window was a Hawaiian dancer. Not a real one, but one of those springy dashboard versions. Joyce flicked it with her finger and watched it gyrate. Good times, she thought. Joyce liked watching the playground change. It had a pattern, a double life. Sun and promise during the day, dark and underground when stars tried to come out. Joyce waited for the in-between part, when day held on and night stood back, waiting for the inevitable. She liked that time best, not because of what came next, but because that's when she could see his face. After the last kid went home for the day, he would show up and wait to carry out his business in the park. It was during those few minutes of dusk that Joyce saw the good in him. Often, he'd pull out a textbook and read it while sitting on a bench placed for watchful parents. Once, she saw him comfort a child who fell and scraped his knee. Another time, she watched him help an old lady across the street. He wasn't a typical drug dealer. Joyce imagined herself uncovering him one piece at a time, discovering whatever mystery awaited the right person. Bucky pulled her back into reality. "Hey, babe! Got any of that salami left? Those sandwiches didn't quite do it for me." "Yeah, Bucky, hold on. I'll get it for you." She cracked open the fridge, looked at her wages represented in food. See, Bucky got a disability payment based on his weight. and Joyce made up for what that didn't cover. She pulled out a ring of sausage and considered cutting it in half, but only for a moment. She wanted to sit at the window for a while, uninterrupted. She threw it on a plate and took it to the man that sat in front of her television. Hers. Sure it was. Credit card said so. As she got closer, Bucky twisted as far as he could without expending too much energy. "Thanks, babe. You're good to me. Come on, how about a kiss?" He puckered up. Joyce obliged, didn't even flinch when Bucky's face sweat smeared past her lips and onto her nose and chin. He smelled like garlic. "Here you go, Buck. Don't eat it all at once. Call me if you need anything, okay?" "Sure, babe." He grabbed for her hand as she walked away, and she stopped for a moment. Let him give it a squeeze. Then she was back at the window waiting for her mystery man. He showed up a few minutes later, waited across the street until the last few kids finished playing. She respected that. He only dealt with customers above the age of majority. She watched him pull out a textbook. She smiled. Schoolbooks felt like promise. He read it under a streetlight until it got dark and quiet enough for his first customer to arrive. The other man sat beside him on the bench. She figured that bench was his office. He'd have a real one someday. She turned that thought in her head until Bucky broke the spell. He was rocking the recliner. "Hey, babe, can you help me get out of the chair? I can't quite make it." "Hang on, I'll be right there." She touched her lips, blew a kiss at the window. As she did, she saw her reflection. Her face was a dark outline. Her hair shone with a golden ring where brightness from the kitchen light bulb went through it. She imagined the rest of her looked like that. Hoped it did. Hoped it did for the man in the park, as young as he was. She just turned toward Bucky when a knock came at the door. "Tell him we're not interested." "I will, Bucky. Just hang on." Joyce opened the door and found herself looking at Raymond. She felt the color drain from her, replaced with a cool clamminess that did not foretell pleasant outcomes. "Raymond, well, this is a surprise. What can I do for you?" "You know what you can do for me. Can I come in?" The question was more a formality than a true request. No sooner had Raymond finished asking than he was in the door. Bucky called back from the living room. "Raymond, what are you doing up here? Something broken in your apartment? You know I don't fix shit anymore. Call that number Joyce gave you." "No, I don't think so, Bucky." Raymond started walking toward Bucky. Bucky started the slow process of turning his head. "Don't bother. I'll come around front so you don't have to strain yourself." "Not sure I like your tone." Bucky stared Raymond down, watched as he came around and stood in front of him. "I don't give a fuck what you think, you fat bastard." Raymond planted himself in front of the television and locked eyes with Bucky. "Raymond, I want you to leave." Joyce tried to pull him away, steer him to the door. He brushed her off and took his place again. "Bucky, I'm here for Joyce. You don't deserve her, and she sure as hell doesn't deserve you." Raymond had the words down, but his face told a different story. A line of sweat had broken out on his top lip. He wiped his mouth. "What the fuck are you talking about, you little twerp?" Bucky had his hands on the recliner's arms. Joyce knew what came next. He was in launch position. "Raymond, you better go." She tried to pull him away again. He pushed back harder this time. "That's my wife you're pushing around. Get the fuck out before I throw you out." "Why don't you try, you fucking hippo?" Raymond would regret that challenge. Bucky pushed himself back, then pulled on the leather launch arms, sending himself headlong into Raymond. This caught his tormentor off guard, and Bucky had his hands around Raymond's neck before he could escape. "I beat the crap out of bigger guys than you." Bucky lifted Raymond off the ground. The eyes of both men were bulging, for different reasons. "Let him go, Bucky. You're going to kill him." Joyce was frantic, started to look around for something to distract her raging husband. "And why do you care? Why don't you tell me what he's talking about?" Bucky turned just enough to look at Joyce. Raymond struggled, feet off the ground. Bucky didn't wait for an answer. Instead, he looked back at Raymond and pulled him in close, letting his feet touch the ground. "What was that you were saying about my wife?" Raymond didn't say anything. Instead, He watched as Joyce ran to a bookcase at the far end of the room. She pulled out an encyclopedia and ran toward Bucky. When she stood at his back, she let go with a swing and nailed him in the head. He dropped Raymond and turned around to look at her. Raymond fell to the floor, gasping and holding his neck. Joyce thought Bucky would come at her, but he just stared. His mouth opened as if he was about to speak, and then his eyes rolled up into his head, looking for thoughts no longer there. He fell backwards, landing square on top of Raymond. The hula dancer bid aloha from the windowsill. For the size of him, Bucky made precious little noise as he experienced his final KO. Maybe it was Raymond that softened the fall. Maybe it was the layers of well-earned fat. Joyce stood and stared at the scene in front of her, volume C of the Encyclopedia Britannica still clutched in her hands. She dropped it and walked up to Bucky, gave him a little kick in the leg. He stayed still. She looked for a sign of Raymond and saw one foot sticking out from under Bucky's ass. It wasn't moving. For a moment, she considered trying to push Bucky off and decided against it. Unsafe. And she was much too small to move him anyway. Instead, she ran over to the kitchen window and checked to see if her parkman was still sitting on his bench. He was. Joyce ran downstairs, outside and across the street toward her man who watched, interested but unmoving. "Can you help me?" she asked him. "Sure, lady, what's wrong?" The man set down his book. "It's my husband. He's dead." "What? Dead? How?" He stood. "What do you want me to do?" "I don't know. Help, I guess." Joyce looked at him. "Can you?" "I'm studying organic medicine. Sure, I can help." He touched Joyce on the shoulder, and it sent a shiver through her. "He might not be dead. Let's go have a look." They ran up the stairs together. When they got into the apartment, the man walked over to look. Before he could say anything, Joyce spoke up. "Downstairs neighbor. He's dead too." "What? Where?" The man turned around in a quick circle, looking for the other person. "I don't see anybody. Is he downstairs?" Joyce walked closer to Bucky, pointed to where Raymond's foot could just be seen. "No, he's here." "Jesus, lady, what the hell happened here?" "Joyce. My name is Joyce." "Okay, Joyce, what happened?" He was more careful saying it this time. "Your name?" Joyce waited. "Tyler. My name is Tyler. I think you might be in shock, Joyce. Why don't you sit down for a minute?" He tried to point her to the recliner, but she refused. "That's Bucky's chair. I'm okay to stand right here," she said, and smiled. "All right then, let me look." Tyler did a quick once-over on Bucky, tried to push him off Raymond, but didn't have the strength. Unable to do a closer examination, he pulled off Raymond's shoe and checked for a pulse on his ankle. "They're both gone, Joyce. You need to call the police." "I will, Tyler, but first, I think you need to go. I watch you from the window. I know what your part-time job is." Tyler flushed, remembered what was in his pockets. Thanks, Joyce. That's a good idea." He started to back out of the room, looked at the door. "If they asked, I wasn't here, right?" "Of course you weren't." Joyce followed him, reached out and touched him on the sleeve. "You have school to finish. You'll be a doctor someday." "I suppose I will be, yeah." Tyler touched back, smiled at Joyce. "Thanks. Be careful." He took his hand away. "Maybe see you in the park sometime?" "You never know." Joyce waited until he was almost at the door. "Apartment downstairs is vacant, if you want a place closer to work." Tyler stopped. "Maybe. Never know. Let me think about it." And he was gone. Joyce smiled to herself and picked up the phone. She dialed 911. The end. Hope you liked the story. If you did, hit subscribe down below. And I'll see you next Friday. Take care of yourself.